My contractor overcharged me. I purchased the only quarry supplying his concrete. Ethan Caldwell had built companies his entire life, but nothing mattered more to him than the house sitting on the hills outside the city. It was supposed to be the place where his family finally slowed down. No board meetings. No late-night business calls. No pressure. Just peace. The design alone had taken almost a year. Every detail mattered to him, from the large glass windows facing the valley to the stone driveway winding toward the front entrance. He wanted something solid. Something lasting. That was why he hired Victor Langley, one of the most respected names in luxury construction. Victor carried himself like a man who could solve any problem. Expensive watch. Perfect suits. Confident smile. He talked fast, shook hands firmly, and always sounded like he was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. "You won't regret this," Victor told him during their first meeting. "My company delivers perfection." At first, everything looked professional. Trucks arrived early every morning. Workers moved quickly across the site. The foundation work began smoothly, and Ethan finally allowed himself to relax. For the first time in years, he felt excited about something that had nothing to do with business. But that feeling did not last long. 3 weeks into the project, Victor requested the first budget adjustment. "Concrete prices are climbing everywhere," he explained casually while sliding paperwork across Ethan's desk. "Supply shortages. Fuel costs. Industry problems. Everybody's dealing with it." Ethan barely questioned it. Large projects always had surprises. He approved the payment and moved on. Then another increase came 2 weeks later. Then another. Then another. Every conversation became about rising costs, delayed shipments, or unexpected expenses. The contractor revenge story Ethan never expected was beginning quietly, hidden behind invoices and polite conversations. One evening, Ethan sat alone in his temporary apartment staring at a stack of construction documents spread across the dining table. His wife, Claire, leaned against the kitchen counter with concern written all over her face. "Something's wrong, isn't it?" she asked softly. Ethan rubbed his forehead. The numbers don't make sense anymore. Concrete costs had nearly doubled since construction started. Victor always had explanations ready, but Ethan had spent years building businesses. He understood markets. He understood pricing. And something about this entire situation felt manipulated. The next morning, Ethan drove to the construction site unannounced. The atmosphere immediately felt different from the polished image Victor normally presented. Workers complained quietly about delays. Several machines sat unused. Pallets of material were missing. One exhausted foreman accidentally revealed more than he intended. "We're waiting on another concrete delivery again," the man muttered. "Victor says the supplier's squeezing everybody." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Which supplier?" "Black Ridge Quarry," the foreman answered before realizing he had probably said too much. That name stayed in Ethan's mind the entire drive home. That night, he began digging deeper. He reviewed every invoice tied to the construction fraud exposed in front of him. Nearly all the inflated charges traced back to the same source, Black Ridge Quarry. The same supplier. Again and again. Ethan's instincts sharpened. This was no random cost increase. Somebody was making money from the chaos. Over the next few days, Ethan quietly started asking questions around the industry. What he discovered shocked him. Other builders were paying far less for concrete than Victor claimed. Some companies even laughed when Ethan mentioned the prices he had been charged. One supplier finally told him the truth bluntly. "You're being robbed." Those 4 words changed everything. Ethan hired a forensic accountant named Rebecca Collins, a sharp woman known for uncovering financial fraud inside corporations. She spent days analyzing contracts, supplier records, and payment trails connected to Victor's construction company. Then she walked into Ethan's office carrying a thick folder. "You were right," she said calmly. "This isn't bad management. This is intentional." Ethan opened the folder slowly. His stomach tightened as he read the numbers. Hidden markups. Fake transportation fees. Inflated emergency surcharges. Shell companies connected to Victor were quietly receiving kickbacks from every concrete delivery. Millions were disappearing through carefully disguised overbilling. The Overcharged construction project was never an accident. It was a system. Ethan leaned back silently, anger building inside him. Not loud anger. Worse. Controlled anger. The kind that thinks carefully before it moves. Rebecca studied him carefully. Most people would sue immediately. Ethan closed the folder. No. I don't want a courtroom fight. He stared out the office window toward the city skyline glowing in the evening darkness. I want leverage. Rebecca's expression slowly changed. You already have something in mind. Ethan smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. I want to know everything about Black Ridge Quarry. The investigation moved fast after that. Ethan learned the quarry supplied nearly 70% of the concrete used across the entire region. Without it, major construction projects would slow down overnight. More importantly, Victor's company depended on it heavily. Then came the most interesting discovery of all. The quarry's aging owner was preparing to retire. Quietly. Privately. The business was struggling financially because of outdated equipment and years of poor management. Nobody in the industry seemed interested in buying it. To most investors, it looked like an old dusty operation with shrinking profits. But Ethan saw something different. He saw power. The smart revenge stories people hear about always begin with one small discovery that changes everything. For Ethan Caldwell, that moment came while staring at an old aerial photograph of Black Ridge Quarry spread across Rebecca's conference table. Massive stone pits stretched across the land like hidden treasure. Endless supply. Endless leverage. Ethan looked up slowly. Set up a meeting with the owner. Rebecca blinked once. You serious? Very. Ethan stood and adjusted his jacket calmly. Victor Langley thinks he trapped me inside this project. His eyes hardened. He has no idea what happens when you try to scam someone who understands business better than you do. If you're enjoying this powerful contractor revenge story, make sure you subscribe, like the story, and stay until the end because Ethan Caldwell's revenge is only beginning. The rain fell heavily over the city the night Ethan Caldwell drove toward Black Ridge Quarry for the first time. The narrow road twisted through rough hills and abandoned industrial land before finally opening into a massive stone excavation surrounded by aging machinery and cracked concrete buildings. Giant floodlights illuminated the quarry like a forgotten battlefield. Trucks moved slowly through clouds of dust while workers in reflective jackets guided loads of crushed stone toward waiting cement mixers. Ethan parked quietly near the main office and stared across the property. This place looked old, tired, and neglected. But hidden beneath all the dust and noise was something far more valuable than most people realized. Control. The kind of control capable of destroying or saving entire construction companies overnight. The contractor revenge story was becoming something bigger now. This was no longer about recovering stolen money. This was about power. Inside the office, Ethan met Arthur Bennett, the quarry's aging owner. Arthur was in his late 60s, broad-shouldered, with rough hands and tired eyes that carried decades of stress. The office smelled like coffee, engine oil, and old paper records. Arthur studied Ethan carefully before speaking. Most investors don't bother driving out here, he said quietly. Ethan smiled politely. Most investors don't understand what they're looking at. Arthur laughed softly at that. For the next hour, the two men talked privately while rain hammered against the office windows. Arthur admitted the business was struggling badly. Fuel prices had increased. Equipment repairs were draining profits. Several large construction companies delayed payments constantly. Worse, Arthur's own sons had no interest in taking over the operation. He was exhausted and ready to walk away. Ethan listened carefully without interrupting. Every answer confirmed what Rebecca Collins had already discovered. Black Ridge Quarry was the heart of the region's concrete supply chain. Nearly every major construction project depended on its materials, including the luxury developments managed by Victor Langley. Ethan kept his expression calm, but inside his mind, the pieces were locking together perfectly. This greedy contractor karma was slowly building into something Victor could never imagine. Arthur finally leaned back in his chair. "So tell me honestly," he said. "Why are you really here?" Ethan paused before answering. "I'm being overcharged on a construction project." Arthur smirked slightly. "That happens every day." "Not like this." Ethan slid several invoices across the desk. Arthur adjusted his glasses and studied the paperwork carefully. Within seconds, his expression darkened. "These numbers are insane." Ethan nodded slowly. "Victor Langley claims your quarry keeps increasing prices." Arthur looked up sharply. "That's a lie." Silence filled the room. The rain outside seemed louder now. Arthur tossed the invoices onto the desk with frustration. "We raised prices slightly this year like everyone else, but nothing close to this. Somebody's adding massive markups." Ethan finally said the words directly. "I believe Victor is stealing from me." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Wouldn't surprise me." That answer caught Ethan's attention immediately. Arthur stood and walked toward the window overlooking the quarry below. Victor wasn't always like this, he admitted quietly. A few years ago, he built a good reputation. Then greed took over. Bigger houses. More luxury projects. More expensive lifestyle. Suddenly every deal became about squeezing people for more money. Ethan stared at the old businessman carefully. "Why keep supplying him?" Arthur sighed deeply. "Because he buys more concrete than almost anybody else." There it was. Dependency. Victor needed this quarry to survive. Ethan felt something cold settle inside him. Strategic revenge was no longer just an idea. It was becoming a real plan. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan and Rebecca dug deeper into Black Ridge Quarry's finances. They reviewed contracts, supplier agreements, employee records, and delivery schedules. The more Ethan learned, the more valuable the business became. The quarry itself was struggling, but its position in the market was priceless. There were no nearby competitors capable of matching its production volume. Replacing its supply would cost construction companies millions in transportation expenses alone. Meanwhile, Victor Langley continued behaving like nothing was wrong. He sent Ethan more inflated invoices. More fake emergency fees. More dramatic explanations about rising material shortages. Every phone call sounded polished and convincing. "I'm trying my best to protect your project," Victor said during one conversation. Ethan nearly smiled hearing the lie. "I appreciate the effort," he replied calmly. Victor had no idea the man he believed he was manipulating was now studying the very foundation of his business empire. The billionaire revenge story unfolding beneath the surface was invisible to everyone except Ethan and Rebecca. One evening, Rebecca entered Ethan's office carrying new financial reports. "You need to see this." Ethan reviewed the document silently. Victor's construction company owed Black Ridge Quarry millions in outstanding payments. Worse, several of Victor's projects were already over-leveraged through bank loans and delayed investor funding. His entire business depended on maintaining steady concrete deliveries. Any disruption would trigger chaos immediately. Rebecca folded her arms. He built his empire on debt. Ethan looked up slowly. And now the supply chain controls the debt. Rebecca smiled slightly. Exactly. Ethan walked toward the giant windows overlooking the city skyline. Light stretched endlessly into the darkness below while storms rolled across the distant hills. Years earlier, Ethan had learned one important lesson in business: the people who appear strongest are often standing on weak foundations. Victor Langley looked powerful because nobody controlled the resources behind him. But now that was changing. Ethan turned back toward Rebecca. Set up another meeting with Arthur Bennett. You moving forward? Ethan nodded once. I'm buying the quarry. Rebecca studied him carefully. You realize what happens after that? Ethan's eyes narrowed calmly. Victor keeps thinking he's squeezing another client for money. He buttoned his jacket slowly. But the second this deal closes, every truck, every concrete shipment, every delivery schedule he depends on, he paused briefly, belongs to me. Outside the office windows, thunder rolled across the city like a warning. And somewhere across town, Victor Langley slept peacefully, completely unaware that the man he tried to scam was preparing to take control of the very ground beneath his business. The acquisition happened quietly. No headlines. No public announcement. No celebration dinners inside expensive restaurants. Ethan Caldwell wanted silence. Silence kept people careless, and careless people made mistakes. 2 weeks after his final meeting with Arthur Bennett, the ownership papers for Black Ridge Quarry were signed through a private holding company managed by Rebecca Collins. By the time the deal officially closed, almost nobody inside the construction industry knew the quarry had changed hands. Arthur retired peacefully to a coastal town several hours away, while Ethan became the invisible force now controlling the region's most important concrete supplier. The smart revenge stories people remember forever are never built on anger alone. They are built on patience. And Ethan was patient. Early Monday morning, Ethan stood on a raised platform overlooking Black Ridge Quarry while trucks rolled through clouds of grey dust beneath him. Workers moved between crushers, loading bays, and conveyor systems without realizing the man watching them was now the owner of the entire operation. Rebecca stepped beside him holding a tablet filled with updated reports. Victor's company submitted another supply request overnight, she said calmly. Ethan almost laughed. Of course he did. Victor Langley still believed everything was normal. He continued overcharging clients across the city while acting like the king of luxury construction. Expensive advertisements flooded social media. New project banners covered downtown developments. Interviews praised his fast-growing empire. But beneath all the polished success, Victor's business was dangerously fragile. The overcharged construction project Ethan once worried about had become the doorway into Victor's weakness. And now Ethan controlled that weakness completely. Over the next several days, Ethan immersed himself in the quarry business. He met longtime employees, studied delivery systems, and reviewed contracts stretching back nearly 10 years. What he found made him even angrier. Victor's company constantly delayed payments while demanding priority treatment. Drivers were pressured to work overnight schedules. Staff members were threatened whenever deliveries slowed down. Arthur Bennett had tolerated it because he needed the revenue, but Ethan had no intention of operating that way. During one meeting inside the quarry conference room, Ethan addressed the management team directly. Things are changing, he said calmly. The room fell silent. Late payments will no longer be ignored. Priority deliveries will only go to clients who respect contracts and pay on time. Several managers exchanged nervous looks because everyone understood exactly which customer Ethan meant. Rebecca slid updated policy documents across the table. These new terms take effect immediately. Ethan remained calm, but his mind was already several moves ahead. This contractor revenge story was never about emotional explosions. It was about controlled pressure. Pressure that slowly crushed dishonest people under the weight of their own greed. 3 days later, Victor Langley stormed into his corporate office furious after receiving the quarry's updated payment notice. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, slamming paperwork across his assistant's desk. The notice demanded immediate settlement of overdue balances before additional bulk deliveries could continue. Victor grabbed his phone and called Black Ridge Quarry directly. Rebecca answered professionally. "Black Ridge Quarry Operations. This is Victor Langley," he snapped. "I need this corrected immediately." Rebecca remained calm. "Your account currently exceeds approved credit limits. I've worked with this quarry for years. Ownership and policy structures have recently changed." Victor froze briefly. Ownership changed? Rebecca smiled slightly even though he could not see her. Yes. Who bought it? That information is private. Victor's jaw tightened. Listen carefully, he growled. My projects cannot stop. Rebecca's voice remained ice cold. Then your outstanding balances should be resolved quickly. The line went dead. Victor stared at his phone in disbelief. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him without fear. Meanwhile, Ethan continued calmly reviewing quarry operations while Victor's panic quietly spread across the city. The billionaire revenge unfolding now was invisible to most people, but its effects were already beginning. Concrete deliveries slowed slightly toward Victor's sites. Payment terms became stricter. Priority scheduling disappeared. Small delays started triggering major problems across his construction timeline. Subcontractors complained. Investors demanded updates. Workers stood idle waiting for material shipments that once arrived instantly. Victor spent the next week scrambling for alternative suppliers, but every option created disaster. The nearest large quarry outside the region charged significantly higher transportation fees. Delivery schedules stretched for weeks. Some suppliers refused to work with Victor entirely because of his reputation for delayed payments. Every road he explored led back to the same ugly truth. He needed Black Ridge Quarry. One afternoon, Ethan drove quietly past one of Victor's luxury development projects downtown. Half-finished concrete frames towered over the street while frustrated workers gathered near silent machinery. Heated arguments echoed across the site. Ethan remained inside his car watching calmly. Months earlier, he had stood in the same emotional position Victor occupied now, frustrated, trapped, and losing money because someone else controlled the situation. The difference was simple. Ethan never stole from people to build his success. That was why he could remain calm now while Victor's empire slowly cracked apart. Later that evening, Rebecca entered Ethan's office carrying fresh reports. 3 of Victor's major projects are already behind schedule. Ethan leaned back in his chair quietly. And the banks? Nervous. Ethan nodded once. Construction fraud exposed publicly could destroy investor confidence overnight. Especially in an industry built entirely on trust and deadlines. Rebecca sat across from him carefully. You know he'll eventually figure out it's you. Ethan stared at the city lights outside the windows. Good. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. You want him to know? Ethan smiled faintly. Not yet. The next morning, Victor arrived personally at Black Ridge Quarry for the first time in years. His black luxury SUV rolled through the dusty entrance while workers watched curiously. He marched directly toward the main office demanding answers. But when he entered the building, he stopped instantly. Hanging behind the front desk was a newly framed ownership document. Ethan Caldwell's holding company name appeared clearly across the paperwork. Victor's face drained of color slowly. One of the office managers looked up nervously. Mr. Langley? Victor stared silently at the document, his breathing becoming heavier. In that exact moment, the greedy contractor karma he created with years of lies, inflated invoices, and stolen money finally came crashing down around him. And for the very first time, Victor Langley understood the terrifying truth. The man he tried to scam now controlled the very concrete beneath every project he owned. Victor Langley sat frozen inside the Black Ridge Quarry office staring at the ownership document hanging on the wall. The sound of machinery outside suddenly felt distant, almost unreal. His breathing slowed as the truth settled heavily into his chest. Ethan Caldwell owned the quarry. Ethan Caldwell controlled the concrete supply feeding nearly every major project his company depended on. For the first time in years, Victor felt something he had not experienced in a very long time. Fear. Real fear. The contractor revenge story he thought he controlled had turned into a nightmare far bigger than he imagined. Victor quickly regained his composure and stormed out of the office, slamming the glass door behind him. Workers turned to watch as he climbed into his SUV and sped away through clouds of dust. But the panic had already started spreading through his business. By the end of that week, 3 more concrete shipments were delayed because of unpaid balances. One downtown luxury tower project shut down completely for 2 days. Investors began calling, constantly demanding explanations. Site managers argued openly during meetings. Suppliers who once treated Victor like construction royalty now sounded cold and cautious over the phone. The overcharged construction project that started with one dishonest invoice was now threatening to destroy an empire. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell remained calm. Every morning he visited Blackridge Quarry before sunrise, reviewing schedules and operations with Rebecca Collins and the management team. Instead of destroying the business through revenge, Ethan focused on improving it. Broken machinery was replaced. Employee wages were increased. Old safety systems were upgraded. Drivers finally received fair schedules instead of impossible overnight demands. Workers who once feared management now respected the quiet businessman who actually listened to them. Ethan understood something Victor never did. Power built through fear eventually collapses. Power built through respect becomes stronger. One afternoon, Rebecca walked into Ethan's office carrying fresh reports and smiled for the first time in days. "You should see this." Ethan reviewed the numbers silently. Blackridge Quarry was already becoming more profitable under the new management structure. Late accounts were shrinking. New construction companies wanted contracts. Several developers previously loyal to Victor were now moving their business elsewhere after hearing rumors about financial problems inside Langley Construction Group. The greedy contractor karma spreading across the industry was moving faster than anyone expected. Rebecca folded her arms confidently. Victor's losing control. Ethan looked up calmly. "How bad?" "Very bad." She sat across from him and opened another file. 2 banks froze portions of his project funding this morning after investors raised concerns about construction delays. Ethan nodded slowly. Construction companies survive on confidence. The second investors smell instability, everything begins collapsing quickly. Delays become headlines. Headlines create fear. Fear destroys trust. And trust is everything in business. Revenge stories like this one. Across town, Victor's world was unraveling by the hour. Inside his luxury office overlooking the city skyline, angry clients filled his waiting room demanding answers. One investor threatened legal action over missed deadlines. Another developer pulled funding entirely from a large apartment project halfway through construction. Victor barked orders non-stop at his staff, but panic was replacing discipline inside the company. Workers whispered constantly. Subcontractors demanded advance payments before continuing work. Several senior employees quietly started applying for jobs elsewhere. Victor smashed his phone against the wall after another failed attempt to secure emergency concrete supply from a neighboring province. Transportation costs alone would destroy his profit margins. Worse, Ethan's quarry still controlled most regional deliveries. There was no easy escape. Late that evening, Victor drove alone through the city trying to think clearly. Rain streaked across his windshield while unfinished towers and silent construction sites passed beside him. Everywhere he looked, he saw projects connected to Blackridge Quarry Concrete. Projects connected to Ethan now. The realization made his stomach twist with anger. He had underestimated Ethan completely. Victor thought he was scamming another wealthy homeowner too distracted to fight back. Instead, he triggered a billionaire revenge strategy that attacked the foundation of his entire company. The next morning, Victor finally decided to confront Ethan directly. He arrived unannounced at Ethan's hillside property where construction on the luxury home had quietly resumed under a completely new contractor team. The difference was obvious immediately. Workers moved efficiently. Materials arrived on time. The atmosphere felt calm and organized instead of chaotic. Victor stepped out of his SUV furious. Ethan stood near the unfinished balcony reviewing plans with engineers when he noticed Victor approaching. Their eyes locked instantly. Victor marched forward aggressively. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. Ethan dismissed the engineers calmly and turned toward him. "Good morning, Victor." cut the act. Victor pointed angrily toward the valley below. You bought the quarry to destroy me. Ethan's expression never changed. No, Victor blinked. No? I bought the quarry because you stole from me. Silence settled between them. Workers nearby pretended not to listen while secretly watching every second. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. You've already made your point. Ethan looked at him carefully. Have I? Victor's confidence cracked slightly. What do you want? Ethan stared across the property for several seconds before answering. The truth. Victor laughed bitterly. You businessmen always pretend you're moral when it benefits you. Ethan finally faced him directly. The difference between us is simple. His voice remained calm but sharp. I built businesses by solving problems. You built yours by creating them. Victor clenched his jaw angrily. Ethan continued speaking. You lied to clients. You inflated invoices. You hid money through shell companies. You treated workers and suppliers like tools instead of people. Victor looked away briefly because deep down he knew every word was true. Ethan stepped closer now. And the worst part? Victor stayed silent. You thought nobody would notice. The wind moved quietly across the unfinished hillside house while tension filled the air. Victor looked smaller now, not because of money or power, but because the illusion surrounding him was gone. Ethan had exposed him completely. Victor shook his head slowly. You ruined everything. Ethan answered immediately. No, Victor. His eyes hardened. Your greed ruined everything. Victor stood there speechless while the reality finally crushed him completely. Around the city, projects were failing, investors were disappearing, and his reputation was collapsing faster than he could stop it. And standing in front of him was the one man he believed he could manipulate easily. The same man who now controlled the very concrete beneath his empire. The city could feel the collapse of Victor Langley's empire before the newspapers even reported it. Half-finished luxury towers stood silent against the skyline like monuments to greed. Construction crews disappeared from sites overnight. Investors stopped answering his calls. Suppliers demanded immediate payments before releasing materials. Every day brought another lawsuit, another cancelled project, another client demanding refunds. The contractor revenge story spreading across the business world had become the only thing people talked about. Some called it karma. Others called it genius. But everyone agreed on one thing. Victor Langley was finished. And at the center of it all stood Ethan Caldwell, the quiet businessman who refused to let himself become another victim of construction fraud exposed through lies, inflated invoices, and greed. Weeks passed after their confrontation on the hillside property, but Victor's problems only became worse. Black Ridge Quarry had fully stabilized under Ethan's ownership. New contracts flowed in constantly. Employees worked harder because they were finally respected. Delivery systems improved. Profit margins increased. Ethan transformed the struggling business into one of the most reliable suppliers in the entire region. Meanwhile, Victor's company continued bleeding money every single day. The banks were now demanding emergency meetings. Developers were pulling out of partnerships. Former employees quietly shared stories online about unpaid wages, fake billing systems, and financial manipulation inside the company. The greedy contractor karma Ethan warned about was no longer hidden. It was public. One cold morning, Rebecca Collins entered Ethan's office carrying a stack of legal documents. It's official, she said calmly. Regulators have opened a formal investigation into Langley Construction Group. Ethan remained silent while reviewing the paperwork carefully. Years earlier, he might have celebrated something like this. But now he only felt disappointment. Victor had talent. Real talent. He could have built one of the strongest construction companies in the country honestly. Instead, greed poisoned everything. Rebecca sat down slowly. There's more. Ethan looked up. Several former clients are coming forward with similar stories. Hidden fees. Inflated concrete costs. Fake shortages. Ethan leaned back quietly. He made too many enemies. Rebecca nodded once. And now they all feel safe speaking. That was the problem with businesses built on fear. The second power disappears, people stop staying silent. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited his nearly completed hillside home for the first time in weeks. The transformation was incredible. The glass walls reflected the sunset perfectly while workers completed the final stonework around the entrance. The house that once represented stress, betrayal, and financial manipulation had become something entirely different. A symbol of survival. Ethan walked slowly through the large open living room while Claire followed beside him, smiling softly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan nodded quietly. For months, this project had nearly consumed him emotionally. The endless invoices, the lies, the pressure, the uncertainty. But standing inside the finished structure now, Ethan realized something important. Victor's greed accidentally pushed him toward a far bigger opportunity. Black Ridge Quarry was now generating more profit than the house itself ever cost. The smart revenge stories people admire most are the ones where the victim does not just recover. They rise higher than before. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, Ethan stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city below. His phone buzzed suddenly. "Rebecca." He answered calmly. "What happened?" "Victor's here," she said. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. "At the quarry?" "No," she paused briefly. "At your office." 30 minutes later, Ethan entered his downtown office building and found Victor Langley waiting alone inside the conference room. The difference between the two men was shocking now. Victor looked exhausted. His expensive suits no longer looked sharp. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. His confidence was gone. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Victor finally broke the silence. "You won." Ethan sat down calmly across from him. "This was never a game." Victor laughed bitterly. "Easy for you to say." Ethan studied him carefully. "Why are you here?" Victor lowered his head briefly before answering. "Because everything's collapsing." Ethan remained silent. Victor looked up again, anger and regret mixing together inside his face. "The banks froze our accounts this morning. Investigators are tearing through company records. Developers won't touch us anymore." His voice weakened slightly. "I built that company for 15 years. Ethan answered quietly. "And destroyed it yourself." Victor closed his eyes for a moment because deep down he knew it was true. Every fake invoice. Every dishonest markup. Every manipulated payment trail. It all led here. Ethan opened a folder sitting on the table between them and slowly slid several documents forward. Victor stared at them silently. Shell companies. Hidden kickbacks. Financial transfers. Evidence of everything. Construction fraud exposed completely. "Rebecca found all of it weeks ago," Ethan said calmly. Victor looked defeated. "So why didn't you turn me in immediately?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Because I wanted you to understand something first." Victor stayed silent. Ethan's voice remained calm and controlled. "You thought power came from taking advantage of people." He pointed toward the documents. "But real power comes from building something people trust." Victor stared at the table without speaking. Ethan continued. "You were so focused on stealing more money that you stopped protecting the foundation beneath your business." The room fell silent again. Outside the office windows, the city lights glowed across the skyline Victor once believed he controlled. Finally, he stood slowly. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. Ethan looked at him calmly. "Good." Victor nodded once before walking toward the door. But just before leaving, he stopped briefly. "You know what the worst part is?" Ethan said nothing. Victor looked back over his shoulder. "You could have destroyed me immediately. His voice carried deep regret now. Instead, you let me destroy myself. Then he walked out of the room forever. Months later, Ethan stood once again on the balcony of his completed hillside home while morning sunlight spread across the valley below. Black Ridge Quarry had become one of the fastest-growing suppliers in the region. New partnerships expanded every month. Employees were thriving. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt peace. The contractor revenge story that started with greed and betrayal ended with something much bigger. A lesson. Because sometimes the people who think they are trapping you are actually pushing you toward the greatest opportunity of your life. If you enjoyed this powerful business revenge story, make sure you subscribe, like, and share the story with others who love smart revenge stories, billionaire revenge, contractor scam stories, and satisfying karma endings.